We often like to talk about the epic side of the Roman Empire, giant battles in which heroes against all odds saved the Roman Empire time and time again from the brink of destruction. We like to look at maps of the Roman Empire and how it expanded to an incredible size, or we like to marvel at Roman architecture and the impressive structures that the ancient Romans built. But with all this fascination about the Roman Empire, we sometimes tend to forget one thing, namely that back then, the same as now, the population of the empire was made up of 50% women. And when looking at all these epic achievements of the Roman Empire, we tend to forget about that 50% of the population. So how then was the life of women in the late Roman Empire? How did it change throughout the centuries? How was it different from living in the early Roman Empire? And might the life of women have even improved in the late Roman Empire? Rome was never an equal society regarding the rights of men and women. In fact, it was extremely unequal. Women had far fewer rights than men, and from the earliest beginnings of Roman society, they played an entirely different role than men. Freeborn women in Roman society, for instance, were recognized as citizens of the Roman Empire, but they could not hold political offices. Their lower rank in society was especially visible during public spectacles. After the time of Augustus, women were only allowed to have the highest rows of seats in the amphitheatrum, even after the ordinary citizens, the plebeians. Of course, there were always exceptions, and the higher the social rank of a woman, the higher the likelihood that she could in some instances attend the front seats, especially in the case of the imperial family. Yet in general, common women had an even lower rank than the lowest of social classes. Rome was a very patriarchal society, and hence a woman would always be defined as a daughter or later as a wife with respect to first the father and then the husband. Even though some women managed to attain a high level of education, such as Cornelia Metella, the wife of Pompey, who was known for her musical ability and her knowledge of mathematics, literature and philosophy, this was certainly not the norm. Women were expected to be housewives, and their domestic qualities were praised far more often than their intellectual achievements. They were expected to run the household and bear children, and hence virginity and sexual purity were culturally highly valued qualities that were considered absolutely important for the stability of the Roman state. Hence, adultery was severely punished. A woman did not have equal rights before the law, and it was virtually impossible for a woman to be divorced from an abusive husband. Slave women logically did not have any rights, and as such were especially prone to abuse and were very often sold into prostitution. Now, as you can imagine, the contraceptives back then were not nearly as efficient as nowadays, and hence many unwanted children were born. But as such children would be seen as outcasts, abortion was the norm. And the abortion in Roman times was, as you can imagine, a very brutal business. Archaeologists discovered huge piles of infant bones outside of ancient Roman cities, as these aborted children, or sometimes also the regularly born ones that were unwanted, were just discarded outside of the city gates. A very gruesome practice where, as one can imagine, the suffering of both the infants and the mothers must have been beyond imagination. We can thus see that throughout the Roman Empire, women often had very brutal lives. And as a general rule of thumb, we can say that the lower the societal rank of a woman, the more brutal her life was. Slave women had it worst, whereas women of the highest ranks of society could sometimes even enjoy a high degree of education and relative freedom. However, even they were expected to bear children, and with the very underdeveloped medicine of a pre-industrial society, this often ended badly for the mother, as the mortality during childbearing procedures was always high, even for women of high social rank. Only through religious practices could women enjoy some relative freedom. The cult of the Vestal Virgins, for instance, was highly regarded by society and lasted until the year 394 AD. These Vestal Virgins enjoyed many freedoms and were worshipped by society. But even that had downsides, because they had to abstain from any form of intercourse for a period of 30 years, which in practice was not so easy to adhere to, and the punishments for breaking that law were utterly severe. So then, if the lives of women in the Roman Empire in general was not so pleasant, Then how was life of women in the late Roman Empire? So the Roman Empire after around the year 300 AD. Was it better or worse than the life of women in the early empire? The answer might surprise you. And if you are a Rome nerd like me, then you will certainly love the wonderfully detailed handcrafted rings and other Roman accessories by the SPQR Shop. These guys make really amazing items, carefully handcrafted, and you will certainly find something in their shop, link in the description. And they even make the one and only official Maiorianus channel ring, which you can order in bronze and even silver to honor the legacy of the Emperor Majorian. I like to think that Majorian would be proud if he could see that. With the code Maiorianus, you even get a 10% rebate on every one of their items, so go and check out their amazing shop. We are often taught that the late Roman Empire was degenerate, a failing state, and that life then was much more miserable than in the early Roman Empire. And that was quite certainly true for men. The likelihood to die in military service was of course much higher in the 400s AD of the Western Roman Empire than during, for instance, the reign of Hadrian. And yet, despite this, in general, the life of women in the late Roman Empire was better than that of women in the early Roman Empire. And here, the rise of Christianity would play an important role. First of all, women enjoyed a considerably higher social status within Christian circles than they did in the Roman pagan society. For that reason, women played an important role in the adoption of Christianity. But Christianity had another very strong positive effect for women. The inhuman practice of forced abortions was outlawed when Christianity rose to power, as every life was now seen as valuable and sacred, and hence even destroying the life of an infant was a mortal sin. This differed starkly from previous Roman society, where abortion was seen as a completely routine and normal medical practice. Thus, women adopted Christianity with greater zeal than men, because it gave them some real benefits of life, protection from brutal forced abortions, and even more influence and social status in these Christian circles. It is no wonder then that the greatest early proponents of Christianity were women. We often talk about Constantine's influence on the Roman world with his toleration edict of Christianity. However, what is often forgotten is that probably his mother Helena had a strong influence on him, and she was a devout Christian. Constantine even appointed her Augusta Imperatrix and gave her unlimited access to the imperial treasury. It is even said that she was the one who discovered the true cross and brought it to Rome in 327, but of course, this cannot be verified and might very well be part of Constantine's imperial propaganda. Nevertheless, it shows impressively that women were some of the fiercest early adopters of Christianity, as they enjoyed more freedom under this religion than they had in the centuries before in the old Greco-Roman society. And of course, it is needless to say that women certainly had as little fun as men when the Western Roman Empire was overrun by Germanic invaders. While the men brutally died on the battlefields, many of the women were raped or sold into slavery or similar gruesome fates. Now naturally, we would think that life for women after the fall of the Western Roman Empire degraded a lot in the remaining part of the Roman Empire. But fascinatingly, this is far from true. In fact, the life of women improved a lot in the surviving Eastern Roman Empire. And here, the famous Empress Theodora, the wife of the Emperor Justinian, would play a crucial role, as she would enact many laws that would protect women and that would increase the role and power of women in Eastern Roman society. During the reign of Empress Theodora, the act of rape was deemed punishable by death, and the possessions of the rapist were transferred to the victim of the assault. This legislation applied to anyone present during the rape, regardless of their status or position in society. Theodora also ensured that women had the right to possess and inherit property, which marked a significant advancement by granting daughters and wives genuine social influence. Daughters now had the ability to carry on a family's wealth, and in the event of a husband's death, the wife could claim ownership of the property and fortune. This newfound legal status alone empowered women across the empire in tangible ways. In contrast to the present day, opportunities for women in professional fields were exceedingly limited. Apart from socially acceptable roles that involved working from home and raising a family, such as weaving, innkeeping, or baking, the concept of a sizable and recognizable group known as professional women did not exist yet, save for one exception. A considerable number of women were employed in theaters and brothels. While this professional class of women faced substantial social stigma, their industry was one of the few spaces where women could work publicly outside the confines of traditional family structures and earn actual income. Consequently, laws that addressed legal matters pertaining to this marginalized and socially powerless group should be regarded as audacious and unabashedly supportive of women in general. But Theodora intended to treat the professional women in her society, even if they were prostitutes, as true professionals. She understood that these prostitutes, actresses, mimes, and singers earned incomes that could potentially sustain them, and income equated to independence. However, brothel keepers held legal and oppressive authority over these women. Thus, Theodora transferred the legal authority from the brothel keepers to the prostitutes themselves. Under the new legislation, women could no longer be coerced into prostitution. If a woman willingly chose to engage in prostitution but subsequently desired to leave, Theodora's laws made it illegal for a brothel keeper to prevent her departure. Theodora relentlessly ensured the enforcement of these new laws. When she discovered that brothel keepers were circumventing the legislation by making girls swear oaths never to leave the brothels, she responded by outlawing such oaths. She mandated that the provincial governor and the head bishop were responsible for enforcing this law, granting her direct oversight over a manageable number of influential men. By assigning 2 individuals to enforce the law, if the governor obstructed a woman's departure from a brothel, the bishop had the authority to override the governor. Theodora, having once been a concubine in the service of a provincial governor, fully understood the extent of power these men wielded over women. Thus, she implemented certain checks and balances. For centuries, intermarriage between the upper and lower classes was prohibited. By law, a prostitute was never allowed to marry a nobleman. Theodora also enacted legislation to abolish this restriction. She also reformed divorce laws by eliminating the requirement for mutual consent, as previously a man could simply withhold his consent, thereby preventing a woman from obtaining a divorce. Theodora put an end to this unjust law. Additionally, she ensured equal dowries for both men and women. Prior to this, the dowries of women entering a marriage were typically significantly higher than those from the groom's side. She also made it exceedingly difficult for women to be forced into marriage. Theodora even introduced laws that protected women who were guilty of crimes. Instead of being incarcerated in common prisons with men, which was obviously problematic, special prisons within nunneries were constructed specifically for them. So counterintuitively, the lives of women in the late Roman Empire actually became better than in the early empire, excluding of course the late Western Roman Empire, where the lives of men and women were equally very little fun. But a woman living in Constantinople in 560 AD, thanks to the laws of Theodora, actually enjoyed far more rights and possibly could lead a happier life than a woman 560 years earlier during the times of the Emperor Augustus, which would certainly seem surprising and counterintuitive to many. We thus can impressively see, with another example, how in some regards, life in the late Roman Empire could actually be better than in the early empire, something which is very often unjustly neglected by historians and popular culture. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. This channel would not work without our amazing Patreon and YouTube members, and I want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. Gratias tibiago, amici. And if you want to learn more about how exactly the Western Roman Empire fell, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. And if you want to learn more about why life was absolutely no fun for men and women equally in the late 5th century West, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.